good afternoon, crackpots. My name's Danny Whitaker. This is the My Own Worst Enemy podcast, where it's my job, as usual, to sit down with some of the biggest and brightest minds in the field of mental health research, all with the aim of providing you guys with information and advice that you can hopefully use to improve your own mental well-being. One for the parents out there today, we're talking about childhood mental health. Now, before you switch off thinking this isn't for you, you haven't got kids, you don't want kids, you're never going to have kids, let me just tell you something. Once upon a time, I was determined to die childless and miserable as well. But alas, here I am, a few years later, the father of a 6-year-old with another one on the way. So it can happen to you too. So, bit of an interesting production process with this particular episode because it's still early days and no one really knows I exist yet. Finding guests to come on the show is it pretty much consists of me just cold emailing people, which kind of feels a bit icky, especially because I'm just getting started and it's not like appearing on this podcast is going to do them any favours career-wise. So it kind of feels like a very selfish proposal as well. I mean, because think about it from their point of view. So, I drop them an email saying, come on my podcast, whatever. And it's like, okay, so hang on a minute. Instead of me, say, going to a conference where I get paid for my time and I get to educate hundreds of people at once, I get to maybe network with other academics and researchers in my industry, maybe even stay at a nice hotel in the process. Instead of doing that, you want me to spend that time coming on your no-name podcast with just you and your mum as my audience, and you want me to do it for free. So, when people are either bored or intrigued enough to agree to do it, obviously, the last thing I want to do is make the process even more clunky and awkward by ballsing it up somehow. So the person I emailed for this particular topic was Samantha Cartwright-Hatton, who is Professor of Clinical Child Psychology at the University of Sussex. Now, at first, couldn't have gone any smoother. I emailed Sam, do you want to be on my rubbish, no-name, no-audience podcast? Following day, I get an email back. She says, yeah, I'm up for that. I'm free this afternoon if you want to give me a call. So I called her, told her a little bit about the podcast and, tried to make it sound as attractive a proposition as possible without telling any porcupines. And she's like, yeah, sounds good. I've got an hour spare next week. Let's do it. Perfect. I wish they all went that smoothly. So anyway, day before we due to actually do the interview, what I usually do is I'll put together like a summary of the questions that I'm going to ask and then email them over. But on this particular day, I had a bit of a family crisis, so I wound up kind of being out all day, didn't get back till the late evening. So I emailed her that night, Sam, so sorry, I haven't got the questions ready. I'll send them over first thing tomorrow. Panicking, she might be like, oh, forget it. But no, she's like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just wing it. So, that was a relief. Anyway, we did it. We recorded the interview. Went really well. But then I played it back. It turns out we'd had a few technical problems with the sound that I wasn't actually aware of at the time of recording. So basically, some parts of the interview hadn't recorded properly. There's like a strange buzzing, beeping sound going on. And basically these parts were unusable. So, I kind of had no choice but to tell her. So again, I emailed her, oh God, a few technical problems, some parts of the interview I haven't recorded properly. She emails back, no problem, we'll just re-record the broken bits next week. So, again. Now, as I've said, it's very clear who's doing who a favour in this situation. At any point of this process, she could have said no. Do you want to come on my podcast? No, thank you. Come back when you've got a bigger audience. And then the next time, I haven't done the questions. And she could have said, well, go away, get back to me when you have, and, we'll reschedule. And then the last time, oh God, I'm sorry that the interview didn't record properly. Forget it. You're the worst podcaster in the world. Do one. But thankfully, that's not what she did. In fact, despite all the mishaps, I apparently did a good enough job that she actually went ahead and sent out an email to some of her colleagues at various universities to recommend they get in touch with me to collaborate on the podcast. And so, as a result of that recommendation, I've now got like 3 other interviews lined up over the coming weeks. So, you know, I don't know what the moral of that story is. It sounds like the more you act like an incompetent fool, the better it is for your career. Probably not. I think what it actually means is that Sam is just a very generous and very forgiving person, which probably goes some way to explaining why she does what she does. So anyway, Sam is the Professor of Clinical Child Psychology and Senior Clinical Research Fellow at the University of Sussex. She works as one of the clinical advisors to Anxiety UK, and in 2009 she received the British Psychological Society May Davidson Award in recognition of her research into childhood anxiety. She's the author of Coping with an Anxious or Depressed Child, a guide for parents and carers, and also From Timid to Tiger, a treatment manual for parenting the anxious child. In today's episode, we talk about depression and anxiety in pre-adolescent children, whether nurture or nature plays the biggest role in the development of childhood mental health, how you may be inadvertently teaching your child to be fearful of the world and how to stop doing so. We talk about why it's more important to praise effort over ability, the 7 confident thoughts that children need to grow up happy and confident, and also why Sam is in favour of installing a communist dictatorship. But if you want to figure out what that means, you're just going to have to keep listening. You can follow Sam on Twitter. She's at SamCH_ClinPsych. That's at SamCH_ClinPsych. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us a positive review on iTunes. That would be massively appreciated. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Professor Sam Cartwright-Hatton. Okay, Sam. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for inviting me.
Today's topic is childhood mental health, but specifically depression and anxiety. I've got to be honest, I know absolutely... I'm not going to say absolutely nothing. I know very little about this subject. Okay. What I kind of want to do with today's topic is... Well, I've already covered depression and anxiety in depth in previous interviews, so it's going to open up plenty of time for us to talk about the actual treatment options, which I know any kind of parents listening to this, if we just say, well, you know, children suffer from mental health issues, and these are the reasons why, but then we don't do anything about helping them out, I'm going to get it in the neck for that. So I'd like to spend a decent amount of time doing that. Okay, Sam, before we actually get started and get into the thick of it, I'm actually quite intrigued as to, firstly, how you got into childhood mental health, but also why, because similar with like doctors and stuff, I always imagine, and doctors that work with kids and stuff, I always imagine it'd be quite an upsetting occupation to be in, and it always confuses me why somebody would choose to go that route. And I guess the same with childhood mental health as well, just because of the kind of distress you see. So if you mind telling me, like, say, how you got into it and why you got into it as well.
Well, I sort of fell into it a bit by accident, really, which is quite unusual, because most clinical psychologists have wanted to do it since they were in utero. It's, you know, it's such a competitive thing to get into at the moment that people have to be really driven. And I'm very lucky that I sort of fell into it, and that I did my PhD. I knew I wanted to do a PhD. I liked research, but didn't really know what I wanted to do a PhD on. I did loads of things I was interested in, but just happened to strike lucky and get a fully funded PhD in the area of mental health. And all I really cared about was that it was fully funded. Sorry, Adrian, my supervisor, if you're listening. So off I went to do this PhD, and I just really enjoyed it and thought, well, I'd like to stay in this area. And if I'm going to stay in this area, then I need to get myself clinically trained. So without really giving it probably enough thought, I trolleyed off and did clinical psychology training. And so that's how I fell into it. I never really wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I wanted to be a researcher. But then having done it, I loved the clinical work, and I love it now when I do it. I don't get enough opportunity to do it these days, but I do absolutely love it. And how did I end up doing children? Well, my PhD was on anxiety disorders in adults. So I felt like I knew quite a lot about that. And then I went on my first child placement, and I got given a couple of anxious kids to deal with. And this was back in the 90s. And I went to the textbooks to see what you do with anxious kids, and there was nothing there. At that point, there was nothing, I mean, literally nothing, not a single trial. The first trial didn't come out until the mid-1990s. And so I thought, well, what do I do with these kids? Well, I'll just use what I know about adults and see how I get on, and actually got on really, really well. And thought, well, there we go, there's my niche. It's working in childhood anxiety disorders. Nobody really seems to know very much, and at least I know a bit about adults, so I've got a bit of a head start, so off I go. And my career's sort of taken me forward from there now, and I now end up working with parents quite a lot. I think partly that's because I am now a parent, and so I do understand what it's like being a parent, how difficult it is sometimes. And how do I deal with it? Well, I went into it all before I was a parent, and I think I was much more hard-headed about it. I think some of the work, now that I am a parent, I would actually find much harder. But because I do research, I don't get faced with a lot of that stuff. I get very sort of carefully chosen cases to work with to fit my research around. So I don't see a lot of the distress. And I think I would find it an awful lot harder than when I didn't have kids.
Yes, I think becoming a parent does make you a little bit soft about all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm intrigued though. Do we know why it is that there was no kind of research on childhood mental health till the mid-90s?
There was bits, but there were no trials on childhood anxiety. I think I don't know why that is. I think traditionally a lot less funding has moved in that direction. So, for instance, we know that of the British mental health budget, only 7% of it gets spent on children, which is crazy when you think that 20 or 25% of the population are children.
Yeah.
And the same has sort of been the case with research as well. And also, I think it's easier to research adults. They can talk to you. They can tell you what they're thinking. They can explain things. A 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old can't do the same. So I think it probably makes sense that we've mapped things out with adults. And only now, when we've got a fairly good street plan of what's going on with adults, are we trying to check out whether that's the same with kids or whether there's difference going on there.
So it's not that there was, like, kids never suffered with mental health problems. They always did. It's just we've only just recently started researching it. Because I was wondering if it might have been a societal change that maybe, kids were fine before the 90s and then life got stressful for them or something. I don't know.
Very good point. And nobody really knows. Looking at trends of mental health over time is really difficult to do because people did measure mental health in the past, in kids as well as in adults, but they measured it in a different way to we measure now. They used questionnaires that we would think are pretty rubbish nowadays. So we come along with our newfangled modern measures and our modern understanding of what mental illness is and our new diagnostic criteria, and we measure it now. But then we try to compare it to what people were measuring in the 60s and 70s, and it just doesn't fit. So my hunch is, my reading of the literature, shaky as it is that things are getting worse and there are more mental health difficulties in children and adolescents than there ever were. But it's difficult to say for sure. But most people would agree it's getting worse.
I might have added a possible episode to the podcast series then with that. It's quite interesting. So just off, before we started the interview then, we've kind of agreed to stick to a particular age range of pre-adolescence.
Yes. And
if you would just like to kind of maybe explain why that is probably a good idea, why adolescence kind of deserves its own discussion.
Yeah. Adolescence is a slightly different time of life. There are different things that are going on in the life of an adolescent that make treating them slightly different. So for younger kids, their family is really, really key, and it seems to be quite important to have the family involved in the treatment process. That may not be the case for adolescents. We know that adolescents are much more influenced by their peers than they are by their parents. And we also know that when you come to adolescence, weird and wonderful stuff is starting to happen in the brain. We didn't know this until very recently, but somebody started brain scanning adolescents and realized that there was major changes happening in the brain that we didn't think could happen beyond toddlerhood. Big bits of brain were not disappearing, but like pruning is called, where synapses in the brain start to disappear and other bits start to join up in a way that we really didn't think could happen beyond babyhood. There's some important stuff happening in adolescence, and that makes adolescence a little bit different, and it means they need treating differently. So yes, today we're just going to focus on younger children, and that's who I work with. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in adolescence.
Okay, I've got to say, to be honest, I'm quite surprised that the concept of mental health issues in children to begin with in the first place. I mean, it's not something, you associate children as being just as carefree and happy, and I mean that's why everyone loves children. Well, not everyone, but the people that do, that's one of the things we love about them. So, firstly, what kind of percentages are we dealing with? Like how many children are struggling with mental health issues? It's like, say, specifically depression and anxiety.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it really depends who you ask. There have been, worldwide, there have maybe been 20 or 30 studies of this over the past couple of decades, and you get really different figures. So there's one Japanese study that showed that about 45% of the kids in their study had a significant mood or anxiety disorder, which is massive. And it may well be there were problems with that study or just the particular sample they got. I really don't believe it's that high at all, even in Japan. She says, having never been there, but it doesn't seem likely. And then there are a number of studies that come up with figures in the sort of 10 to 15% range. And you're starting to think, well, yes, that's possible. But the study that I tend to go to with this is a very large, very well conducted British study. It was conducted, it was a while ago now, it's 10 or 12 years ago, and I know they are thinking of repeating it, which would be good, where they got, I think it was about 10,000 families to take part, and they were really careful to make sure that these families were really representative of the whole of Britain. So what they did is they went to the Child Benefit Register, which at the time everybody was on. I know it's changed now, but at that point everybody was on this register. And they managed to convince about 80 or 85% of the people they contacted from this register to take part. And they went and they met them and they interviewed the kids and they interviewed the parents and they gave out diagnosis. So it was a really good, really carefully conducted study, and I trust the results. And they found that something like, in the age range we're talking about, pre-adolescent kids, about 5% had a mood or anxiety disorder. That is, they were anxious or depressed. So 5%, so that's 1 in 20 kids. It's a lot.
Yes. Does it tend to be one more than the other, depression more than anxiety or vice versa?
Yes. In this age group, very much more anxiety than depression. It's actually really quite unusual to see a depressed pre-adolescent. And I tend to worry about those kids more than I worry about an anxious kid. I think a depressed preteen is a bit of a worry. And I would really hope that a parent who is experiencing that with their child would be getting some really good help from mental health services, because I would worry more about that child than an anxious child. So
what would be, in both instances, what would be some kind of manifestations of some outward symptoms, if you like, of a child being either overly anxious or suffering from depression?
Okay. The symptoms are really pretty similar to those you see in adults. So for an anxious child, well, it would depend what sort of anxiety they were suffering from, but maybe they would be worrying quite a lot. Maybe they'd be letting lots of physical symptoms in their body, so they'd be having tummy aches and headaches and other aches and pains in their body, feeling sick, that sort of thing, complaining of that quite a lot, and finding when they go to the doctor that there's nothing really, nothing physical you can pin it on. Maybe they have fears and phobias of certain things they can't do, certain places they can't go because they're too frightened to go. So that's the sort of thing you're talking about with anxiety. With depression can look a little bit different in children than it might in an adolescent or it might in an adult. So typically in an adult and adolescent, you'd see very flat mood, very inactive, lots of slumping around. You may not see that. You can see that in kids, but quite often it manifests in kids as behaviour problems and lots of angry outbursts, lots of tearfulness, lots of distress, possibly losing weight or not putting on weight how you might expect them to. They too might have lots of feelings in their body and be complaining of tummy aches and headaches and that sort of thing. You might, in a child, find that they will complain of life being very difficult and complain that everybody hates them and they can't do anything and they're no good at anything. But some kids don't. Some kids just don't kind of recognise that as well as an adult might and won't complain about it. In some kids, they will.
Yeah, see, I'm quite interested in what the themes are of both of these, particularly what the themes are with a child that's struggling with depression, because, you know, for an adult, it's, you know, these kind of stressful life circumstances, especially if it's existential dilemmas. So, yeah, what are the kinds of things that children are talking about that, you know, that are causing depression or anxiety? Or
it really varies from child to child, and I'll be honest, I haven't seen that many because you just don't get it that often in pre-adolescence. And some kids are good at talking about it and some kids aren't, and they can't tell you what's going on in their head. But you have children saying things like, I'm no good at school, nobody likes me, I'm thick, I'm never going to get a decent job. I mean, kids can think about quite adult themes. You do get kids saying, I'll never get a decent job. You get 6-year-olds saying, I'll never pass all my exams and things. And they have no idea what an exam is, but they've heard that talked about and it's something they've cottoned on to. But it tends to be those themes: failure and not being liked.
I think that's kind of interesting in itself, in that with adults there seems to be this a trend of comorbidity with depression and anxiety. So it's interesting that in children it tends to act more in isolation, so that you'll get the anxiety by itself. Or is that not the case?
I'm not sure it does. Yeah, I think you're right. You do see a lot of anxious kids who are not. In fact, most of the anxious kids I have seen, they weren't depressed as well. Whereas if you took a sample of anxious adults, quite often you see depression comorbid with it. Yeah, I think that's right. That's a good point, actually, Danny. That's a really interesting thought. You tend not to see that comorbidity in kids quite so much. However, when I think about it, depressed kids I've seen, quite a lot of them have been very anxious as well. And actually what the literature says is that if you treat the anxiety in a depressed kid, quite often the depression will go away. So it's sort of like the depression is secondary. The depression has come because of the anxiety.
What would be kind of your entry-level age for this kind of thing?
Anxiety or depression or both?
Well, yeah, both.
Anxiety, you get parents saying, my child has been like this from the day they were born. A lot of kids do just seem to be born anxious. It's the sort of child they are. So they would be a tiny baby in their mother's arms and a door would slam and they'd jump and they'd cry and then they'd be inconsolable. And they've just been like that from the start. Not always, but you do hear parents talking like that. With depression, I personally, the youngest depressed kid I've seen would be 7 or 8, I would say. I've never seen a kid younger than that who I have diagnosed as depressed.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because that's obviously when, you know, as a kid's getting a little bit older, that's kind of when you're starting to become a bit more introspective and...
Oh, that's it, exactly. And you start to, if you look at worry, if you just look at worry in kids, not thinking about it as an anxiety disorder, but just normal worry, the sort of stuff we all do, it starts to come in at around 6. Kids younger than 6 probably don't really worry in the way adults do. They might be scared of stuff, but don't worry in the same way. At 6, 7, it starts to kick in. And fear and understanding about death starts to kick in then as well. There's a lot of cognitive structures falling into place around the age. And lo and behold, that's when the depression...
Yeah, my little boy, he's just turned 6, but I think since we had an elderly relative die probably about a year and a half ago, so he's like 4.5. And... oh, we made the mistake. If it was a mistake of explaining the situation to him.
I don't think it's a mistake, Danny, really. I think that's sensible.
But he's obsessed with death now. And, you know, we've had a few tears at night when he's going to bed saying, oh, you're going to die one day. And is that normal? Just getting my own little consultation while I'm here.
It's absolutely normal. I mean, if it gets extreme and he can't sleep and it's happening night after night, maybe there's a problem. But it's absolutely normal for kids at this sort of age to go through this. In fact, my daughter's 6.5, and we had a year ago, her grandmother died. And at the time, nothing much really, connected. But now she's just started to talk about death and worry about it, and to get a bit upset about possibly something happening to the other granny. It's normal. It's normal. They start to connect the dots at this age. And if they're a sensitive sort, then they will worry about it.
Wow. Okay. So let's move on to some of the causes are going to be. So I think a lot of people think of children as you're a blank slate, and it's this kind of nature versus nurture argument. So firstly, when children are born, are you a blank slate, or is there already genetic tendencies there towards depression or anxiety? I know that with in discussions I've had so far, there's this idea that you can be genetically predisposed to react to stressful situations in kind of a less, like in a less, I was going to say less strong way, but that doesn't sound. Yeah. And is that just the same for children, and it just kicks in much earlier?
Yeah. So there is no doubt in my mind that children are different to each other from birth. You get some kids who are just sensitive souls from the word go, and those kids, yes, they are more at risk of anxiety and depression later on. But actually, interestingly, they're also more likely to have good stuff happen to them. These are the kids who tend to be quite nice kids. They're not starting wars, they're not starting banking crises, they tend to be quite conscientious, lovely, caring, empathic people. So they've got all the good stuff as well. And if that's allowed to flourish, they can do really well in life. But they do have this vulnerability as well to getting a little bit more anxious, a little bit more depressed than other kids. As to whether that's genetic or not, that's, if I knew the answer to that, I'd have a Nobel Prize. It's really, the jury is properly out on that, Danny. There's lots of evidence that there's something genetic going on for anxiety and depression, but we do not know what it is. We have not managed to pin it down to any genes in particular. It's probably hundreds of genes all working together, and we don't know how it works. And there's some interesting research coming out looking at how anxiety and depression are transmitted within families. So we know that if you as a parent have an anxiety disorder, or you as a parent are depressed, your child is more likely to experience the same thing. It's not guaranteed. They're most likely going to be fine, but they're just more likely than your average kid. And when you look at what is dictating that, there's a couple of big studies that have just come out to show it's not actually very genetic. A lot of that is environmental stuff that is going on for those kids. And so we're trying to pick apart what that is, because if we can work out what it is in the environment that's making these kids more likely to get anxiety and depression later on, hopefully we can put those things right and stop it happening. So it's good, in a way, it's a good news story, because if it's genes, we can't fix genes. Not yet, anyway, but we can fix environment. So
yeah. So okay. So when you're talking about environment, I suppose that could kind of manifest in two ways, really. On the one hand, you've got kind of life experiences or kind of traumatic events that pop up out of the blue.
Yeah.
But then you've also got the question of, is it the parent's fault?
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about both of those? So, these kind of traumatic events and then the kind of child rearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Parents are only part of the picture. When we talk about environment, parents are only a bit of it. There's so many other things that impact on a child and how they turn out. So we've got school, we've got wider family, granny and grandpa, we've got the neighbourhood. Is it a safe neighbourhood? Is it a dangerous neighbourhood? What the kids like in your kid's school class? Then we've got physical health. Is your kid physically healthy or not? Is there someone in the family who's physically poorly, and that's creating, a difficult environment at home? There's poverty. We know poverty is associated with poor mental health. There are so many things in the environment that do impact on children. Parents are only one bit of it. The reason I think that people have cottoned on to parenting, and it feels like there's a lot of parent blaming around, is because parents, you can maybe sort of change a bit. You can change parenting. You can't change totally ingrained poverty. It's in our society, and I, as a clinical psychologist, can't change that much as I wish I could. I can't change if you live in a crime-ridden neighbourhood much as I would wish I could. I can't change your kid's school much as I wish I could. What I can do is take you as a parent and say, right, what can we do in your home to make things as best we can for your kid? What can we do with parenting? So it can really easily come across like, oh, it's all parents' fault. And I just don't believe that for 1 minute. And there's actually not very much research evidence that it's parents' fault. But what we do know is there are certain things that parents can do that seem to be more likely to raise confident kids. So that's what I talk to parents about and teach them how to do that. The other thing I would say about parents is I do a lot of work with parents. That's the main focus of my work, and I absolutely love it. I love parents, love working with parents. And in all my, probably 15 years of working with parents, I have never yet met a parent who deliberately got it wrong or did anything to make their child anxious. The things that parents do, particularly around anxiety, come from a really lovely place. They come from a good place. They come because they're good, caring people who want to protect their child from harm. The problem being that sometimes if you wrap your child up and protect them as you want to, I'm a parent, I know what it's like. You want to stop anything ever bad happening to them. I'm sure you're the same, Danny. But sometimes that can make the problem worse. And it's helping parents to work out, where is that a problem? Where is it not a problem? Where do you need to pull back? Where do you need to grit your own teeth and kind of, suck it up a bit and let your child be a bit in pain?
But is there a tendency for it to be that children with parents with anxiety or depression are more likely to suffer from those issues themselves?
Yes, they are. So there's some research. There's a couple of studies looking at this. There's one small study, and it was the first one, and I think they probably didn't get it quite right, but they showed that kids who had a parent with an anxiety disorder were 7 times more likely to develop an anxiety disorder themselves. I think that figure's too high. Another study came out that was bigger and better, and they found that having an anxious parent maybe doubled your risk of having an anxiety disorder. And actually, even when you had a parent with an anxiety disorder, you only had about a 30% chance of getting an anxiety disorder yourself. 7 out of 10 kids with a parent with an anxiety disorder were fine. 70% of them, fine. Just those 30% who we want to find out about and look after them and see if we can stop them getting the anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
Increase to 70, reduce that 30.
So I guess you could find it that you've got maybe, say if you've got a set of 3 siblings, there could be one who've been raised in the same environment, same parents.
Yeah.
But they're the one that starts suffering with anxiety, whereas the other 2 kids can be fine. Yeah,
and you see that all the time. Parents going, how can it be different? I treat them all exactly the same. And that's interesting because good parents, sensitive parents, never actually treat their kids all the same. They respond to the child in front of them. So you get an interesting thing there where perhaps you've got 3 kids, 2 are really gung-ho, water off a duck's back. They don't get distressed. They just go out in the world and they're fine. Then you've got your little sensitive one who gets really upset really easy by loads of things. They get really distressed. You can see, the little crumpled face and the tears and you just want to put your arms around them. And though that kid, any sensitive, normal, sensible parent is going to treat that kid different, right? They just are. Because you're going to give them what they need, which is a little bit more care, a little bit more protection. The problem comes when actually that ends up being a little bit too much care, a little bit too much protection, and means that the child isn't going out in the world and facing their fears a bit and isn't making mistakes and picking themselves up and dusting themselves down again, which we all need to do. Mm. So I totally understand where parents are coming from when they do that. But sometimes it helps, makes the problem worse.
So when it comes to actually, let's say a parent feels that their child is unusually down or anxious, what's the procedure of actually testing for this? And also, how do you distinguish between a child that's suffering from anxiety and a child that's just introverted or shy? So when does it become pathological?
Yeah, very good point. So if we deal with the second question first, so how do you decide if there is actually a problem or not? I'm really glad you raised that because it is okay to be an introvert. It's fine. It's a good thing to be an introvert. Introverts have a lot of qualities that this world really needs.
Well, so I class myself as one, so.
Yeah, well, there you go. And there's a wonderful book called Quiet. I don't know if you've read it.
Susan Cain, brilliant book.
Yeah, and she does a lovely TED talk as well, if anybody's interested. Extolling the virtues of the quiet person. Love it, love her. and I love quiet people. So I'm really glad you raised that. There's nothing wrong with being quiet. So how do you know when there's a problem? Well, really, I would say if your child is doing the problem behaviour much more than other children. So if your child is worrying, that's fine, all kids worry, don't worry about it. But if they are worrying far more than other kids far more than their siblings ever did, and it just feels like it's too much, then maybe there's a problem. Also, if it's stopping them from doing things they really need to do in their life, then it's a problem. So if it's stopping them going to school, if it's stopping them going to, clubs, or stopping them joining the football team that they would love to join, or stopping them having a sleepover occasionally when they're a bit older, or if it's stopping them accessing healthcare, they can't go to the dentist because they're too scared, something like that, then it's time to think, okay, this is too much. We need to get some help with this. And the other thing is if it's really distressing them, if they are distressed, kids cry all the time, moan and whinge all the time, they do. But again, if it feels like this distress is more than you've noticed in other kids, then maybe there's a problem here and it's time to get it checked out.
Right. Another thing that I think is worth asking is when it comes to adults seeking help for their mental health issues, there's very much a dialogue between the therapist and the patient. When it comes to children, obviously, and the younger they are, the more they're going to find it difficult to articulate themselves, what it is they're feeling, the kind of things they're thinking about, and the parents are kind of speaking on their behalf. Does that ever become a problem? Or
yeah, it does. I haven't done much work treating adults, but when you're doing your clinical training, you have to do a bit. So I really notice a difference treating kids and treating adults. When adults come in with an anxiety disorder, they're not comfortable being there, but they want to be there. And they've got goals, and the goals are to get over the difficulty. When a kid's there, they've usually been dragged there by a parent. They don't want to be there. They do not want to get over this to start with. They just want to be left alone to get on with their life. So they quite often won't talk to you. When they're young, very young, they quite often can't talk to you. They don't really know what to say. They don't understand your questions. They don't understand what's happening to them. They can't introspect on their thoughts and their feelings quite so well. So it is difficult, and you do end up depending on the parent quite a lot and doing some very fast and fancy footwork to try and build a relationship with the child very, very quickly to try and get them to open up to you. Because actually a shy kid, the last thing they want to do is talk to a strange woman in this strange office. So yeah, it is difficult. So yeah, it's about getting the relationship with the child really quickly so they'll open up to you if they can. Using the parent as a resource. They know, you may be the expert on child mental health. They're the expert on their child. They know their child far, far better than you ever will. And using other resources, using the teacher, if you can get hold of them, they can often be very, very valuable. And anyone else who's around, other family members, can be useful. And then when it comes to working with the kid and treating the kid, we usually get the parents involved in some quite heavy bribery. So we have lots of rewards, lots of star charts, because this kid does not want to get over their dog phobia. They don't want to go and stroke that dog. They just want to be left alone. On the other hand, if you offer them, a bag of shot pins, if they will go and stroke that dog, sometimes that can get you somewhere, and the means is justified by the end. So you have to find different ways.
Yeah, kind of tipping the balance of motivation, I guess.
Exactly. You put your finger on it much more elegantly than I did, yeah.
Okay, so I want to move on to kind of treatment options. So once a child has been diagnosed with either or depression or anxiety, I'm picturing my grandma now back in the day, and she would have said, it's just a phase. He'll get over it. Now, is there any truth in that before we actually, can it be just left alone and it will be just a phase?
Yes and no. There's quite a lot of research on this, and it seems to be that some kids, they'll just grow out of it and they'll be fine. But it's maybe a third or a half of them, and we don't know which third or which half. So if you just leave it, there's a 50-50 chance they won't grow out of it. Maybe more, maybe 60-70% chance they won't grow out of it. And we have no way of telling. So I would say, if you are worried, try to get it checked out. Now, whether you'll ever get anybody to actually talk to you and give you some service is another matter entirely. But if you're worried, I would check it out. I wouldn't just wait for it to just blow over, because it may not. And we know that if it doesn't blow over, it can cause all kinds of other problems down the line, stitching time and all that.
Just out of interest, when you say, well, some kids will grow out of it, what does that mean to say they'll grow out of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Most of the research has looked at diagnosis. So what they do is the typical bit of research will get a couple of hundred kids and they'll measure their anxiety levels. And they'll identify some who look like they've got an anxiety disorder, so really severe anxiety. And they'll do that on a questionnaire. So they'll say, if you scored over 30 on this questionnaire, we're going to say you've got an anxiety disorder, which may be a bit not quite right, but it's good enough. And then they'll follow them for 5 years and see what happens. And they'll find that maybe a third of those kids, when you come back in 5 years, they're not scoring over 30 anymore, they're scoring below 30. But they may be scoring 28. Do you know what I mean? They're probably not scoring 50, they're scoring 28. So they're probably still struggling a little bit, but they don't quite meet the threshold for disorder. I think there will be some kids who go through a really tough time in their childhood and have a really bad patch when they would get a diagnosis, and then it blows over and they go through life and actually then they're fine and they never have another day's trouble with it. But I would say they'd probably be the exception rather than the rule, would be my strong point.
Okay. So what would be first line treatment? What would be the first thing for either the parent or the therapist to try and do?
Right. Well, the first thing is to go and see your GP. And I say that with a bit of a heavy heart because I know a lot of GPs and they really, really struggle with this. They are not well trained in what to do with this. They certainly do not know how to treat anxiety and depression in young children. And they would admit that. That's not a failing on their part. They've not been trained to, and they shouldn't be doing this. But the problem is what they're meant to do is then refer on to child mental health services. The problem being that child and adolescent mental health services are so poorly funded at the moment that unless things are really, really bad, they'll just get knocked back to the GP. And then you've got the poor, beleaguered GP trying to manage it. And to be honest, they're barely more skilled than the average parent with a book. So go and see your GP, try to get a referral. And I would say just keep going. You just have to keep hammering on that door. You have to be quite assertive in most areas to get that referral to child mental health services. It varies from area to area. There are some areas where there are other services around that aren't child mental health services. Maybe they're run by the charity sector or maybe they're run by social services. It will vary depending on what part of the country you're in. Do lots of Googling. Talk to as many people as you can. Ring up every helpline you can find and try to find out what is available for your kid. Talk to school. Talk to the Senko at school. It's a battle. It shouldn't be like this. You should be able to go to your GP and get signposted to great evidence-based services, and that hopefully is what it will be one day, but it is not there yet. So you've got to fight.
What would be the top evidence-based service? Would it be CBT?
No one has researched anything but CBT for anxiety. For depression, there is one trial, if I got this right, I think there's one trial that looked at psychodynamic psychotherapy and got kind of okay results, but it wasn't really very clear from the study. The vast majority of research looks at CBT, yes. And CBT works pretty nicely for depression and for anxiety in kids. Maybe 55, 60, 65% of kids are getting better, as in they don't have a diagnosis at the end of the trial. That still means a third of kids are not getting better at the end of treatment, and we're still not very good at knowing who those kids are going to be and knowing what to do with them next. But yes, CBT is all that we really have evidence for.
What would be kind of a general idea of the kind of CBT that a child would, the kind of exercises or whatever that they'd be doing? Because all the CBT I've done is very much kind of revolved around the cognitive distortions. And you sit down and you disprove these cognitive distortions to yourself. Do you do that with children? I can't imagine that'd work. And also, how much of the responsibility of it is the parents' involvement? Because obviously, again, as an adult, you do your CBT on your own, not with your parents. So how does that work?
It's much less well-researched than adult CBT, much less well-researched. You know, in adult CBT, there must be, I don't know, what are there, like 1,000 trials out there for CBT for anxiety? There are loads. Anxiety and depression, thousands. Kids, maybe 30 trials. And actually, most of the trials only include kids from about 8 years and up. Doing CBT with a kid younger than 7 or 8, you're exactly right. It's hiding to nothing with most kids. You get the odd kid who's really switched on to what's going on in their head, and you can do little bits with them, but most kids are not there. And you're saying, can you tell me what's going on in your thoughts? And let's challenge that thought. Let's see if that thought's right. And you're looking at you like, what's this woman on about? Can I go and play now? So that is why I tend to work through parents, because I can give parents the skills to do a little bit of basic CBT with their kids. You can do a behavioural experiment with the kids. So a behavioural experiment is where the kid says, I'm scared of dogs because dogs will bite me. Okay. So you test it out. You find a friendly dog and you tie it on a very short lead and you have somebody holding it, and then you have someone holding the kid's hand, and the kid tries to touch the dog and finds out that the dog doesn't bite them. That's an experiment where you've tested out the kid's belief. You can do stuff like that a little bit better than you can do the sitting down and talking about it stuff. So we teach parents to do that. And we teach parents just some basic stuff for how to talk to your child when they're worried. And then we talk to parents just quite a lot about how to set up your child's life so they're living in a really calm, clear, consistent world, because that seems to do anxious kids really, really well. They like to be in an environment where things are predictable. Nothing bad pops up out of the blue. There's nothing difficult kind of happening. They know what the rules are. They know what will happen if they break the rules. They tend to respond very well to that. And they respond well to lots and lots of praise and little rewards now and then. And they respond well to not being shouted at, not being smacked, and things just being pretty gentle, really. So we talk to parents about all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to dig into all that in a minute. But before, I'd be a bit remiss if I left this out. The use of medication in children, is that a thing?
Yeah, it's not a thing in this country, and I also thank goodness for that, because we simply do not know what these medications are doing to the developing brain, and it really worries me that they could be doing stuff, stuff that we can't reverse, we can't put back. It may not be, but it worries me. I'd much rather see that kids got really good quality evidence-based treatment delivered by well-trained therapists. Now, that isn't there at the moment, so should we be giving medication out instead? That's a really difficult question. I think not. If I was in the situation and had a very distressed child, I would not give them medication personally. I just don't think we know what it does.
Is that the parent's choice? If a parent went to a GP, from what I understand, you can ask your GP for antidepressants. You say, I'm not coping very well. I'd like some antidepressants. Can a parent go to the GP and do the same for the child?
Technically speaking, GPs shouldn't be prescribing antidepressants to children themselves. They should be referring them to a child psychiatrist to do that. I suspect it does happen sometimes, but they shouldn't really be doing it. So if you've got a good GP, they won't do it. They'll refer you on.
Okay, and I know this will probably be something that goes on as well. What would you say to parents that, obviously, you see your kids suffering, and the same as when it's yourself, you don't want to necessarily have to do 10, 12, 16 weeks of CBT. You just want somebody to come and take it all away. And so, if you're reluctant to give a child medication, or you just can't get hold of it, I guess I can imagine some parents would turn to like herbal remedies, going through the herbal section on Amazon and seeing what to do with all those kind of concoctions. And I was just wondering, are any of those safe, or is it just a bad idea in general?
The answer to that is we just don't know. I've heard parents talk about using St. John's wort, for instance. Again, I would stay away from it. We just do not know what it is doing to a child's brain. We know it's doing something, but we don't know the consequences of that down the line. So I would avoid it. And there's also various interactions with other medications and food and stuff that you just don't want to be doing this without a doctor watching over and keeping an eye on your kid and making sure it's not all going wrong. Yeah, I would say please don't do it. Okay.
So I think, particularly with this subject, prevention's better than cure. Prevention's always better than cure.
Yeah.
But yeah, with this one particularly. So I think we spend the rest of our time kind of going through things that parents can do, either just as general good parenting techniques, or if they kind of spotting the seeds of anxiety, in their child, what kind of things can they do? What are good parenting techniques and that kind of thing?
So if you've got a child who's a little bit on the sensitive side, and you think they're the sort of kid who's prone to getting a bit anxious, a bit worried about things, a bit overly distressed about things, there's a couple of things that seem to really make a difference. There are two big things. One is making sure that everything is very calm and clear and consistent and predictable around the house. So having your life set up so there's not too much shouting and yelling. Now, I know, show me a house with small children where there isn't some shouting and yelling, and I'll show you a very unusual home, but trying to keep it to a minimum, really, and trying to put lots and lots of kind of organisation in place so mornings aren't really stressful, so everything's ready and you've got lists of what everyone needs to take out of the door and all of that stuff, and trying maybe getting up a bit earlier, because that's a real flashpoint, isn't it, morning?
Sorry, if I could just stop you there. So that sounds like, kind of generally good. It sounds like a good idea, but if you don't do those things, what will that cause in the child? Why is that bad for the child if you can't manage to do that?
For most kids, it'll be absolutely fine. It'll be water off a duck's back. But if you've got a slightly more sensitive kid, it can really build into the picture of the world that they're developing. So children are basically learning about the world. They're learning what the world is. They're learning how it works. They're learning what they can expect of other people. And anxious kids, sensitive kids, are more likely to develop a picture of the world that isn't very safe, and a picture of other people where they can't really trust them, and a picture of the world where bad stuff pops up out of the blue without any warning. And we're trying to stop that from happening. So if you're showing your child a picture of the world where everything is calm and consistent, where people are pretty nice and pretty calm most of the time, and where bad things don't happen and shouting and smacking doesn't really happen, and where everything's just sort of okay, that helps the child to build a picture of the world which says the world's okay. It's okay. Bad stuff isn't going to happen. So
this is it Rachman's Pathways to Fear? I think I've heard you talk about these.
Yes.
Could you go through those, the three pathways, I think they are?
This is a Canadian psychologist, I think, called Jack Rachman, who he came up with this idea that there are three ways to developing fears. And he said that one way is by having something really bad happen. So if you're getting bitten by a dog, you are then quite likely to be scared of dogs, and fair enough, And then he said the second way is by hearing someone else tell you stuff that is scary. So you may never have met a dog. You've certainly never been bitten by a dog. But your dad, for instance, goes, "Oh, don't go near that dog. It might have rabies and bite you and then you'll die." Right. You're going to feel scared of dogs. And then the next one is called Vicarious Learning. This is where we learn from seeing what other people do. So maybe you're out walking with your mom and she doesn't say a word, but she sees a dog and she grabs your hand and yanks you away from the dog and pulls you close. Doesn't say a word. You're going to learn that dogs are scary things. So he said there are these three ways to developing fear, and there's been quite a lot of research checking that out, whether that's right, and it does seem to be right. And what is really interesting is everybody thought that the first pathway, the kind of getting bitten pathway, would be the one that was really, really important and that explained most phobias, and actually it really isn't. Most people who have a phobia have not had a bad experience with that thing. They've just heard about other people's bad experiences, or seen somebody else have a bad experience, or seen someone else just being scared. So if you are a parent of a sensitive kid, yes, try really, really hard not to show your fear.
Well, are these your ideas, these three kind of ways to counteract that? The zipper mouth, Botox face, and the Oscar-winning performance?
That's right, yes. So this is me and not just me, some colleagues as well. We come up with this idea that if you're feeling really scared of something and your kid is around, what you need to do is zip a mouth. So what you need to do is remember Rainbow. Danny, you're younger than me. Do you remember Rainbow, children's TV program?
Yeah, I do vaguely, with the Zippy, the orange guy.
Zippy the orange alien, he had a big zip on his mouth.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling scared and you just want to go, oh no, it's all going wrong, it's going to be a disaster and then I'll die, you just zip your mouth up so it can't come out. So your child can't hear the fear coming out and can't learn from that. And the next thing we say is it can also come out in your face. So if you're looking absolutely terrified, your kid will pick up on that. And we've done some interesting little experiments here where we've shown kids videos of their parents being scared without any voices at all, and the kid has picked up on it and their heart rate's gone up. So just from looking at your scared face, it can make your kid's heart rate go up. So we say Botox face. You have to imagine X Factor judge of your choosing. Far too much Botox. So you're feeling absolutely terrified, but actually your face is cool, calm and collected. And the final one is the Oscar-winning performance, where you're feeling absolutely terrified. You're shaking like a leaf. You stand up straight, shoulders back, head held high. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Now, we don't expect parents to really be doing these things, but it's just as a bit of a silly reminder that if you've got one of these sensitive kids, you need to just watch what's coming out of your mouth and watch what's coming out of your face and your body language, because they do pick up on it very, very easily. And what I often say is that we are hoping to win a Nobel Prize in our lab because we have discovered a new body part in the body of the anxious child. And it is a massive 2-foot radar that sticks out of the top of their head and detects worrying, worrying, fretting within a 500-yard radius. Ordinary kids don't have it, but your sensitive kid has got this extra bit, and just got to be a bit careful around them. Because
so when people say that kids can pick up vibes, quite literally can. Yes, and
sensitive kids seem to do it much more. You know, if you've got a water off a duck's back kid, you're all right. If you've got one of these sensitive kids, you've just got to be super careful because they do pick it up really easily. Yeah, so yes, that is quite key. And the other thing I would say for any parent, whether that parent is anxious or not, is encouraging your child to have a go attitude to life. Okay, have a go. If you think something's too difficult, just have a little go. If you think that new food is going to taste revolting, go on, just have a go. If you think joining in the football game in the park is going to be horrible, have a go. Like climbing frames too high, have a go. It's very easy to fall into a trap when you've got an anxious child of just wrapping them up and putting your arms around them and making them safe. And I know, I feel your pain, but just push them out of their comfort zone a little tiny bit and it will help so much.
How do you make that distinction, though, between encouraging them and being too pushy and making them feel pressurised?
You've just got to know your own child and just push a little bit. So if they're having complete screaming head dabs and a meltdown and they're really distressed, you've possibly gone a little bit too far. But if they're gritting their teeth and they're looking a bit distressed, but they're doing it and they're coping, you're doing well. That's fine. You may need to do a bit of bribery sometimes, buy an ice cream if you've got that climbing frame. That's fine with me. You go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to kind of finish on I think this is quite a powerful concept. The seven confident thoughts, which I think could be good for anybody, really. But yeah, if you could run through what they are and why each one of them matters.
You put me on the spot now, Daniel. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head.
Well, it's okay. I've got them here in front of me. It's my job to do the research on you, so don't worry. So I'll go through them, and then if you just kind of expand on them a little bit. So number one, the world is a pretty safe place.
Okay, so we know that anxious kids tend to think that the world is quite dangerous. And if you go around thinking the world is a dangerous place, you are going to feel anxious, right? I mean, it just, you just are. So we say to parents, you want your kids to think the world's a safe place. Even if you as a parent don't believe that. And a lot of parents I work with say, well, I don't believe that. But they do, when they think about it, realise that they do want their child to believe it, even if they don't. So it's about not telling your child about the dangerous stuff that happens in the world, doing zipper mouth when you're scared, about not having the news on. I have a 6-year-old. She doesn't know what the news is because we do not have it on in her presence. There's no need for a 6, 7, 8-year-old to have any idea of what's going on in the rest of the world, particularly the bad stuff. Just don't need to know. Shelter them from it. It's good.
Yeah, I think it's statistically true as well. I'll try and dig up some statistics on this, but the world is actually, whether you believe it or not, it is statistically a pretty safe place, especially the Western world where we are. So
yes, we are. Children growing up in Britain in the 21st century are the safest children who have ever existed. The odds of anything very bad happening to them are vanishingly small. Yeah.
Number 2, I can cope with most things.
Anxious kids tend to have quite low opinions of their coping skills. And sometimes that's because they haven't given themselves the chance to learn coping skills. They won't put themselves out there. They won't put themselves into slightly dodgy situations where things could go wrong. They won't take the risk of failing. So that's your job as a parent to kind of push them into those situations very gently, with very little baby steps, but to encourage them to do that. And put them in situations where they've just got to cope a little bit sometimes. Let them be on their own. Let them go and run around the park with you in the distance, keeping a vague eye but not kind of hovering, ready to catch them from every little fall. Make them cope sometimes.
Sounds similar to number one, this one, but what's the distinction? Bad things don't usually happen to me.
Yes, it is. It is quite similar. But what we want parents to think about here is just framing their child's world so that bad stuff doesn't happen. So particularly what we're talking about here is really don't be smacking your child. Don't be doing lots of shouting at your child, and try to protect your child from other people who might be doing that. Make sure that your child's world is a safe place.
I think this one's pretty important. I can kind of relate to this. Bad things don't usually pop up out of the blue.
Yes. The reason we put this one in is because I've worked with so many parents, lovely parents, who've got these really sensitive kids, who what they do is something bad is coming up for the child, like maybe they've got to go to the dentist and they don't like the dentist. So they know their child's going to get distressed. They know they're not going to be able to console them. So they do the obvious thing, they don't tell them until they're getting off the bus outside the dentist. I totally see where they're coming from. But the problem is, if you do that, what does your child learn about the world? Your child learns that hideous stuff can fly out thin air without anyone can slap you around the face. Now, that is not a good way for a human being to live their life, is it? We all need to know that we can just be calm and relaxed. And if something bad is coming, we get a bit of warning to prepare ourselves. We all need a bit of preparation when bad stuff is coming, and kids are no exception. So even though it sounds a bit counterintuitive, if there's something difficult coming up for your child, do give them a little bit of notice and suffer the pain of them being vile for the next 24 hours because it is worth it in the end. Yeah.
Number 5, I have some control over the things that happen to me.
Yes. Kids actually don't have a lot of control over their lives, do they? But control is really at the core of anxiety. Anxious people tend to feel they don't have control over stuff that happens to them. It's a real problem. So we want kids to get a feeling that they do have a little bit of control over the things that happen to them. Not masses of control. We can't have I don't think I'll bother going to school today, Mum, or crisps in my tea tonight, Mum, or I'm going to stay up late tonight and watch them Strictly, Mum. Obviously, you can't give them that degree of control, but you can give them control over what clothes they wear, whether they have a yogurt, pudding, or, a banana. Little things, the little tiny bits of life where you can give them control. Hand it over. Yep. Make them feel they have agency over their own life. It's such a good thing for kids.
Number 6, people are pretty nice, really.
Anxious kids, depressed kids often think that the world's full of people who haven't got their interests at heart, who don't like them, who don't respect them. And we really need that to not be the case. We really need them to trust people. And I run into trouble with the stranger danger brigade a little bit here. I don't believe in teaching kids about stranger danger. Strangers are not a risk to your kids. They're not. There are risks to your kids out there, but they're not from strangers. They're from cars, and they are sometimes from people you know and trust, but they're not from strangers. So let's not be doing that. And let's try to build up a picture for this child where other people do respect them. And that starts at home by being respectful of your child's thoughts and feelings, listening to them, agreeing with them, not automatically putting them down or insisting that you're right because you're the adult. It starts at home. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's it. You pinched number 7 off me. Number 7 was other people respect me. So
right. Yes. I see. It's related. Yes.
Yeah. So the thing you say as well is what's important about those 7 confident thoughts is it's not enough to just kind of sit there with flashcards and make the child repeat them as a mantra. You have to actually instill these thoughts through behaviour.
Yeah, I think it's not parenting words, it's parenting actions. So it's setting up your child's world so that every day it just feeds the 7 confident thoughts a little tiny bit, and setting up your child's world so that it doesn't chip away at the 7 confident thoughts too much. And there's lots of ways that parents can do that. The most basic one, and I would say this to any parent, is to just play with your child and enjoy being with your child. Sit down with them 5 or 10 minutes a day and just be with them. Turn your mobile phone onto silent. Don't be trying to do dinner at the same time. Just sit down and play. It could be playing a board game. It could be, cooking together. It could be kicking a ball around the garden. Just be with them. enjoy them. It's those times when kids open up and tell you things apart from anything else. But mostly it's just to tell your child that, you know, good stuff happens in this life and that people are okay really, and things are nice and safe and predictable. Kids really benefit from that stuff. So that, just playing with your child and being with them, really feeds the 7 confident thoughts.
Yeah, and quality is more important than quantity, would you say, in that respect?
Definitely. Quality is more important than quantity. So if you're spending several hours a day with your child, but you're not really engaging with them during that time, you're off doing other things, and you're a bit grumpy and irritable because you're trying to actually answer emails and work at the same time, and you're trying to juggle 83 things, it's not going to be as good as 10 or 15 minutes sitting down, really concentrated time with your child, really giving them your full attention.
Right. There's some other things that I've heard you mention are these idea of praise and reward, planned ignoring, and then to minimise harsh punishment, the latter sounding kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But could we just kind of run through those and be specific about what they actually mean?
Yes. So the praise and reward it's very easy for parents, stressed, busy parents, to fall into a trap of just kind of shouting commands at your kids, do this, do that, and then when they don't do it, kind of go, oh, for goodness sake, and, you know, shouting at them a bit. And we all shout at our kids sometimes, even me. I'm guilty of it. But trying to manage, kids are difficult, right? They never do what you want them to do when you want them to do it. But trying to manage that in a really positive way, so positive discipline, is so good for building the 7 confident thoughts. So rather than waiting for your kids to get it wrong and then smacking and shouting, trying to give them every opportunity to get things right and then praising and rewarding. So when you say to your child, please hang up your coat, and for once in a blue moon they actually do it, you say, oh, thanks for doing that. I love it when you do things straight away. It really helps mommy. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Mwah, mwah, mwah. That's all it takes. You don't have to go and buy them a bike for that, you know. In fact, I would say with the rewards, definitely, if your kid's got something they're really struggling with, really finding it very difficult to do, and they really, really need to get on top of it. So this could be really struggling with something at school. You know, maybe they're really struggling to learn to read, or maybe it's something at home and they're really struggling to, sleep in their own bed at night, and they're 9 or 10, they really need to do that by now. Something that's a real struggle. Build in a reward scheme. It doesn't have to be mega expensive, but whenever they take a step in the right direction, you give them a reward. And it could be some sweets. I'm okay with sweets occasionally. That's all right. Not all the time, but occasionally. Stickers for younger kids. Or it could be, marbles in a jar. You get a marble in a jar and then you can swap them for, a treat at the weekend, or maybe it could even be 10p. Money, that's all right. Use a little bit of cash. But also social rewards. So when your child does something you really like and it's a real step in the right direction for them, giving them a bit of social rewards. So spending a bit of extra time with them, going and playing a game with them, painting the nails, helping them cook pudding, whatever. Just social rewards are really powerful for kids. So yeah, using lots of praise, lots of reward to get what you want out of your child, rather than slipping into lots of shouting and punishment.
What do you think about this distinction between whether or not you should praise effort versus outcome? I've read a little bit about this recently, and what are your thoughts on that? Yeah,
this is really interesting. So this comes from the work of Carol Dweck, who's a famous American psychologist, and she found that if you praise kids for their ability, so you say, "Oh, you're a really good artist. I love your picture. You're a natural artist," or "Oh, you got 10 out of 10 in your spelling test. You're a natural at spelling," or "Oh, you did great in your maths homework. Oh, you just must be really good at maths." Then actually feels good for the kid at the time, but actually doesn't do them any favours in the long run, because when they hit a roadblock, they have a spelling test where they don't do well, for instance, the kid thinks, well, how do I deal with this? Well, I don't know, because all I've done in the past has just been a natural genius at it, and I don't know how to be more of a natural genius at it. They hit a roadblock, and quite often you see a lot of those kids really crashing when they have a failure. However, if you praise kids for their effort, so I love your picture, I can see how much thought you've put into all the different colours and how you've arranged all the shapes, I love it. And well done for getting 9 out of 10 on your spelling test. I know you worked really hard at practicing your spellings. So you're really praising the effort. When the child hits a roadblock, they have a failure. They think to themselves, what do I do here? Well, their answer is, well, in the past I've succeeded by trying hard, so that's what I'll do. I'll try harder. And that's exactly what you see in all the experiments. Kids who are praised for the effort bounce back from a failure. They're resilient. They try harder. They gird their loins and have another go. Kids who've been praised for just being naturally good at stuff have nowhere to go. They don't know how to be naturally better.
That's really interesting, because you can be guilty of, your kid turns up to you with the rubbishest picture they've ever drawn in their life, and they've not made any effort. You can tell they haven't, and it's like, oh wow, that's so amazing. So that's bad to do that.
Well, it's okay, because when you just say, oh, that's amazing, you're not praising their ability, really, are you? It's not like saying, oh, you are the next Picasso, darling. You just say, oh, that's nice. You're giving them a bit of praise. It's okay. I'm all right with that. What I'm guilty of, I find, is it rolls off the tongue. I say, oh, you're so clever. And then I have to slap myself a bit and go, I mean, you tried so hard at that.
Right, okay.
So that. And I would say to parents, honestly, we all get this wrong all the time. Don't worry if you slip up with this. It doesn't matter. It's better to praise wrong than to praise not at all. But just try to be just nudging your praise a bit more down the effort line than the natural ability line.
Right, okay. What about this planned ignoring? Sounds great to me, if I'm honest, but go on.
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about this because we only have a very brief amount of time. And this is something that I want parents to get right, because this is something you can get wrong. If you get it right, it's brilliant. If you get it wrong, it's distressing for the parent, it's distressing for the child, and actually it really unpicks the 7 confident thoughts. But just to give you the basics of it, if you give lots of attention to a behaviour that your child is doing, what's going to happen to that behaviour?
Well, they'll do it more.
They'll do it more. You'll get more of that behaviour, and that's been proven over and over again. The opposite is also true. If you take your attention away from your kid's behaviour, this particular behaviour they're doing, what will happen to that behaviour?
Yeah, they'll stop doing it, yeah.
Eventually they will stop doing it. And again, that is shown by lots and lots of research. But it's not always straightforward. Sometimes when you stop giving attention to a certain behaviour, your kid will try even harder. So if your kid is swearing, for instance, and they do it because it gets a rise out of you, the thing to do is to stop giving them the rise. But to start with, they will try it more and more and more, especially if you've got quite a persistent kid, stubborn kid. So this is something I like to go through with parents in a lot of detail, and we practice it a bit, and we talk about what to expect when you first do this planned ignoring, as we call it. So if you're going to be ignoring the kid when they have tantrums, we go through exactly how you do that. And we talk about all the emotions that are going to come up in you when you're doing it, because it does. It really, pushes your buttons when your kid is really trying it on. So I don't want to talk too much about that. But yes, just to say, if your kid is displaying a behaviour you really don't like, if you try to give it a bit less attention, you will eventually see less of that behaviour.
Is there any kind of resources online that somebody could take a look at, or any books about that are go into that in a bit more detail if anyone's interested?
It's a really good question. I touched on it on my book, which I think you've got on your website, haven't you? The Coping with an Anxious Child.
Yep.
And the Timid to Tiger book. We talk about that a little bit in there. Other books that talk about it, no, not in great detail.
Well, that's fine. They just have to buy your book.
Yeah. I wish there was just a good basic book that covers all the aspects of parenting, behaviour management that I could recommend to parents. And there's lots of books that have bits. There are not many books that have the whole package for me. There is a book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk, which I really love, and I'd recommend it heartily to any parents. And it touches on a lot of this stuff. And so that's probably the closest I would get
Okay.
to it.
Finally, this minimising harsh punishment. It kind of sounds obvious, but I guess maybe it isn't, because there's different lines drawn between what certain people consider harsh. And so what would you say on that?
And I think as well, it sounds obvious. And I think most parents, most modern 21st century parents, if you said to them, is it good to smack your kids? 90% of them would go, well, no, it isn't. But there's actually a substantial minority of parents who don't think that. They've never had the opportunity to sit and think about that. And perhaps they were smacked and hit and had very harsh punishment and think, well, it didn't do me any harm. So I think there are a lot of parents who still do use these ways of managing their child. And then there are a lot of parents who really don't want to do that. They don't want to shout. They don't want to smack. But when it comes to the crunch, their kid is pushing every button they've got. They're really stressed because there's other stuff going on in their life. and they just snap and they shout and they smack and they don't want to. So what we talk to parents about is, first of all, convincing parents that this is not an ideal thing to be doing, and that smacking and shouting unpicks the 7 confident thoughts. And when a parent is at that stage where they accept that, yeah, I don't want to be doing this, we then talk to them about other techniques that they can be using. So we talk about the found ignoring, that works in some situations. We talk about using loads of praise and reward to get the good behaviour that you want before you try to get rid of the bad behaviour that's the opposite of it, if that makes sense. So if you want your kids to play really nicely together, not fight, then you've got to be praising when they're playing well together. Don't just depend on waiting till they're fighting and then punishing it.
Right.
You see what I mean? So you kind of praise the opposite of the bad behaviour, and then when the bad behaviour comes, we give parents a set of techniques for dealing with that. You can't ignore them if your kids are, picking 7 shades out of each other. So you have to do something with that. But what do you do? Well, then we talk to parents about what sort of consequences you can use. And that really depends on the age of the child, on what their behaviour is, and what their individual likes and dislikes are. It has to be really specific to the child. A punishment for one child may not be a punishment for another. So sending a child to their bedroom for one child might be absolutely devastating and really upsetting. Another kid would be like, great, go on the PlayStation. So it really depends on the kid. I don't like to use the bedroom, incidentally, because it's supposed to be a place of calmness and sanctuary, isn't it? So we try not to use that for punishment, but you get my point. So we talk to parents about techniques they can use, and it's about not being too harsh. So if your kid has done something minor, like sworn at granny, then that's not being grounded for a fortnight, is it? Generally speaking, it's something a bit more minor than that. Perhaps there'd be a more minor punishment. Maybe they just have to have a little time out for that. Or maybe you're just going to ignore it. That possibly in some situations is the thing to do. On the other hand, if your child has been found to really injure deliberately another child, then a 5-minute timeout. Say your kid is 10 years old and they've just really hurt another kid. A 5-minute timeout is not the answer there. Might be with a 3-year-old, not with a 10-year-old. So there's so many things that will factor into this. But we talk to parents about not being too harsh, about doing it very quickly and getting it out of the way. Punishment shouldn't really hang over you. Should fit the crime if at all possible, because natural punishments are much more effective and are much more fair on the child. So what would a natural punishment be? So you say to your child, okay, I told you to put your bike away in the garage and you haven't put your bike away in the garage. So I'm going to put it away, but then you can't have it for the next day. That's not quite a natural punishment, but it sort of flows from the behaviour. So it's things like that. And what else do I say to parents? What other things are important? Oh, making sure it's not shaming. This is a really big thing. If you're going to mete out a punishment to a child, it shouldn't be public if at all possible. So don't be doing it in front of a house full of other kids. Take them away quietly to the corner and tell them what the punishment's going to be. Shouldn't be about shaming them in front of other people, because as we know, shame is a very damaging emotion, and it's something that if you experience it a lot during childhood is potentially quite problematic. So those are the main things we talk to parents about.
Right, I'm just thinking when you said the whole swearing at granny thing was quite a minor thing. That wasn't a minor thing for me. If I'd have sworn at my gran, I would have got my ass tanned with a slipper.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So you're obviously quite a well-behaved child, so that was, that was the worst thing you could have done. But
yeah,
some families I've worked with, it's you kind of have to pick your battles with kids, don't you? As parents, we all know that you've got to pick your battles. And if your kid has got some serious behaviour problems, don't start the swearing. Maybe not yet, anyway.
Yeah, like you say, I think it's been there's been like a generational shift in the way kids are punished as well. Like a granny chasing a kid down the street with a slipper nowadays wouldn't go down very well, would it?
Yeah, but we were subject to standard issue 1970s and 80s parenting. It's quite different, really.
Yeah. Anyway, Sam, that's absolutely perfect. But before I let you go, I've got some kind of philosophical questions to run by you, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
Start off nice and easy and then get a bit deeper as we go along. The first one is, have you got any book recommendations on this topic? I know we've kind of covered that, but just on child mental health in general.
Child mental health in general. So I really like How to Talk to Kids So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. I think that's a really, really good book. for any parent. And there's a great book also called What Every Parent Needs to Know. That's aimed at smaller children. If anybody's about to become a new parent and is about to have a baby in their house or a toddler in their house, I would strongly recommend that book. It really talks about how the developing social mind comes about and how to give your child a start in life that really protects them.
Okay, perfect. If you could have unlimited funding to research anything you liked, however niche, however bizarre, what would it be and why?
Okay. I would spend it on prevention research, I think, because I think a stitch in time saves nine, and I think there isn't a lot of prevention research going on at the moment, and I think there's an awful lot that we can do. I think we're starting to get a really good idea who is at risk, what kids are at risk of developing mental health problems later in life. We can't always get it right. There'll be some kids where there were no risk factors and they come out with awful difficulties. And of course, there'll be kids who had all the risk factors and come out fine. But we're at the point now where we can have a pretty good guess at what groups are really going to struggle. And I think we're at the point where we've got stuff that we could do. We know, for instance, that if a parent has a mental health problem, but they are providing a really good parenting for their child, regardless of their difficulties with their mental health, then their child is protected. You know, their kid is much less likely to have a mental health problem. So I would spend the money on that. But then I would say that because that's what research I do.
Well, that's what the question's for. If you could chair a meeting with the ministers at the Department of Health, what policy or policies would you try and push through to improve the mental well-being of the general public?
So are we talking policies around mental health services here, or are we talking much more broadly? If I was Prime Minister for a day and I could do anything.
Yeah, think very dictatorial. You can just do whatever you want.
Benign dictatorship. Yeah, okay, I quite fancy that, especially at the moment. I think I would... There's a really interesting book, I don't know if you've ever read it, called... it's gone right. The Spirit Level. You come across The Spirit?
No.
I can never remember authors because I read everything on a Kindle. So I never know who's written any books anymore. Barely know the title. And it shows, it's written by some economists, and they look at income disparity in a country and the effect that has on all kinds of social ills. And what they showed, chapter after chapter, was the bigger the disparity in income between the rich and poor in a society, the more societal ills that country has. So if you take Scandinavian countries, which are pretty rich countries, and there are rich people, there are poor people, but the gap between the rich and the poor is quite small. And you compare them to another country that's quite rich. For instance, I think it's countries like the UK and the USA were rich countries, but the gap between rich and poor is very, very much larger. Then you see far more social ill in the countries where they have the gap. So you're much more likely to see mental health problems in the USA, in the UK, than you are in Sweden, for instance. And they showed us again and again, not just for mental health, but for physical health, for how long people live, for teenage pregnancy, for crime, for everything that we as a society worry about. It was so tightly associated with how much income disparity there was in that country. And interestingly, the mental health problems are not just there for the poor. If you live in a country with a big disparity and you are rich, you're right at the top of the tree, you are still more likely to have mental health problems.
Oh, wow.
That disparity. I should have said that before. It's one of the key tenets of this, really. So even if you're rich in one of these countries, you're still in trouble. So if I could solve mental health problems and all social ills in a day, what I would do is I'd make the country a much fairer place. I would obliterate poverty, and I'd have us all much more equal. I sound like I've just returned into a communist state, and
yeah.
I don't think it's at all. But I would have things a lot fairer and a lot closer.
Okay, interesting. We'll have to check that book out as well. Okay, going a bit deeper now. So, what part of your career are you most proud of?
Okay, that's interesting, because I think in common with a lot of scientists, you sit and you pick holes in your own research and you look at it and you wish you'd all done it differently. And there's so many things I would have done differently. But I know you want me to pick something. So I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the stuff I'm doing at the moment because it hasn't actually had any impact yet. But I'm really hoping it does. So we'd just done a treatment trial where we went to adult mental health services and we talked to adults who were getting treatment for an anxiety disorder. And we said to them, do you have a kid? And if they did say yes, they had a kid, then we asked them if they'd be interested in coming along on a one-day workshop, actually only a 4 or 5 hour workshop, talking about raising confident children. And this was really popular. Lots of people wanted to do this. So we had 100 people who have anxiety disorders and a kid, aged between 3 and 9 years. And half of them got this new workshop and half of them didn't. They were the control group. They got nothing, unfortunately, other than just a few bits of kind of leaflets from us. And we followed those families up for a year and we followed their kids up for a year to see what happened to them. And what we found is that if your parent had this one-day workshop, by the time 1 year later came along, you had 20% fewer anxiety symptoms than the kids in the group where the parents didn't have the workshop. So 20% reduction in anxiety symptoms compared to not having this one-day intervention. So it's not that massive. And we had 100 participants, which sounds like a lot. For this sort of research, it's tiny and it's hopelessly inadequate. But it was just a feasibility study to see if we could get the whole thing to run, really. So if we could just make the whole thing stand up, really. And it did. So that 20% reduction in anxiety symptoms, that we don't have enough people to do, to really say if that's real or not. That could be a fluke. And I have to say that I'm a scientist and I'm not sure I believe it. It could be a fluke. We have to do this again. We have to do it with 700-800 people to find out if this is real. But if it is real and we are reducing anxiety symptoms by 20% for one day of work with a parent, then that's great. And actually we did it in groups. We did groups of parents, kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 parents in a group. And we worked out it cost £50 a family for this. If that's real, and I've got everything crossed here, then I'm very, very proud indeed of that. And I hope that we can do more research around that. And if it works, get it out there and get it available to everybody who needs it.
Wow. Okay, final 2. Outside of family and academia, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment? It used to just be outside of academia, but it's too easy to say my kids, my family, so you can take them as given.
Oh, okay. Oh, gosh. So what?
Any investment of time or money?
Time or money. Outside of academia. Gosh. I'm building a house at the moment. So
that's pretty cool, yeah.
It's not very fulfilling at the moment. It's incredibly stressful. But it is very much filling mine and my family's time and emptying our coffers very thoroughly. So I think it qualifies on those grounds. And I think it will be really amazing to have a house that you've made just right, just for you. So I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, perfect. Finally, last but by no means least, what do you think is the key to happiness?
Oh, flipping heck, Danny. To have a Nobel Prize if I knew that. I think it's a million and one things, and I don't think it can ever be the same for any two people, can it? I think what makes me happy is going to be very different for somebody else. For me, I know I'd be happy if I could worry less, but I know that's not the case for everybody. So something that would make everybody happier, working less. There we go. So maybe this is another one. If I was Prime Minister for a day, I'd make everybody work a 4-day week or less. There we go. That would make loads of people happier, lots happier.
It definitely would. Sam, it's been amazing to talk to you. Very interesting. Thank you very much for your time. Is there any places you'd like the listeners to visit? Are you on social media? Any websites? Anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. So that would be great if you could send it off to there. A bit of a shout out to Anxiety UK, who are up there in Manchester with you, Danny. Don't know if you have come into contact with them. They're a great organisation.
Not as yet.
Great organisation for people who suffer from anxiety disorders, largely run by people who themselves have experienced anxiety disorders, so they really know of what they speak. They've got lots of advisors who are the leading academics in the field, so they really, really know what they're talking about.
Okay, perfect. Sam, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Danny.
as always, if you'd like to comment on this episode, you can do so at myownworstenemy.org/podcast. That's also where you'll find all the show notes and links to any relevant information. If you'd like to contact me, I'm Danny D. Whitaker with 2 T's on all the various social medias. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at danny@myownworstenemy.org. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by sharing links to your favourite episodes with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. And also, you can subscribe via iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Just search for My Own Worst Enemy. So, as always, until we meet again, behave yourselves, but not too much, and I'll see you again next time.